Welcome, Rajat.
Wow,
Rajat
good to be
Nag
here.
is with us here at NCER as our latest distinguished fellow and formerly at the Asian Development Bank as the Managing Director General of the ADB. We are very pleased to launch something that is going to be quite unique and it also has therefore a rather unique name. Many have talked about the 21st century as being the Asian century, and given Rajat's work at the ADB over the past many years and his extensive knowledge of East Asia, we requested Rajat to give us a series of lectures on his view on how this Asian century will pan out. And so appropriately we are calling it the Asian Century Lectures. Rajat will give the first one of these lectures, 5 lectures as we have now decided, on the 31st of March at 6 p.m. and there will be a series of other lectures. Rajat, what inspired you into thinking about the Asian century and how we might put a frame around this Asian century from what you've observed in the other countries in East Asia and of course how it's all going to relate to India?
Shekhar, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me to give these lectures. It's a great opportunity for me, and I'm looking forward to this exchange with you and other colleagues. Like you, I was at the eye of the storm in the 97 financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And it burnt us, and I think it burnt us emotionally because you had a growth path and nothing could go wrong in Asia, and suddenly you had the Thai baht and everything else fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
And then Asia came out of it relatively quickly. Damages done, but it came out. And I personally remember in 2004, 2005, the euphoria was just all over the place. We are back again. It's the Asian century. Look where we are headed, the glitzy towers of Mumbai or Shanghai or Manila. And I remember, Shekhar, at that time saying to myself that this is great, but, and that but is the one which I think we need to focus on, because Asia, I'm concerned about, is fast becoming two Asias. One shining Asia doing very well, and the other large inequities, huge social deprivations, and therefore I think it's very appropriate for an institution like NCER to sit back and say, okay, Asian century, what are the positives, but what are the challenges, what are the speed bumps ahead,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore is the Asian century just are talking about it, or is it real? And my own feeling is that it is very plausible that we've got many things going for Asia, but there are challenges, and those challenges need to be addressed if it's going to become a reality. So these 5 lectures is basically to take a very honest look from the perspective of people like you and I who believe in Asia instinctively.
Yes.
But I think we are also realistic enough to put it through the prism of cold reason.
Yes.
And then say, okay, Asian century, what will cause it, what may derail it, etc. So this is the genesis of the thought, and I'm very glad that you and colleagues at NCER are giving me this opportunity.
Well, we are privileged to have the opportunity, and appropriately the first lecture is going to be called The Two Faces of Asia and the Need for Inclusive Growth. And then we have some very exciting future lectures that will build on the theme that I think you're going to lay out on the 31st of March. I think your second lecture is going to talk about population dynamics and the demographic transition, as well as the call on natural resources that this demographic transition will make.
Exactly.
And thereafter you're going to talk about, I believe, infrastructure deficits and the whole notion of how we're going to finance the kind of infrastructure, particularly that a large economy like India still needs. The other Southeast Asian countries and the Far East Asian countries have clearly already progressed beyond a point of infrastructure deficits, but they too, with changing technologies, are going to have to deal with some transformation in their economies. And I think the fourth lecture is going to be a particularly exciting one, because I suspect you will deal with some thorny yet some very potentially rewarding issues of governance and institutional growth. And finally, I think you're going to come around to what I know is very close to your heart, which is regional cooperation, and how there is possibly no way that large economies, but also the smaller economies, can do it alone. And it's going to require a level of statesmanship and a level of give and take that probably hasn't yet been seen in Asia. Your thoughts on all of these?
And just to complete it, and the last lecture will be on green growth, and that will complete the series. Shekhar, we're starting from the proposition that growth is not only good but is necessary.
Yes.
I don't think there's any debate on that. But what I think we need to recognize is a necessary but not sufficient condition for development.
Yes.
And I believe that growth, if it is to be meaningful, has to be inclusive, which is what we've just talked about in the first lecture. But it has to be clean, in the sense of being clean growth in terms of the corruption and governance and institutions, and it has to be green. So within that rubric, the topics that you have just mentioned are 8 challenges that I think are critical for Asia. Infrastructure, I mean, there's a huge infrastructure deficit. $8 trillion over the next decade. Where is that money going to be coming from? Therefore, you need financial sector reforms to be able to mobilize savings.
Absolutely.
You need to have the population dynamics recognized, as you just mentioned. Now, everybody is very excited about the growing population, young population in India, median age less than 25. But will that be a demographic dividend, as many people think, or will it be a demographic curse? And if it's not to be a demographic curse, we have to find employment opportunities. Employment opportunities in a world which is fast becoming very demanding of knowledge, innovation, therefore quality of education. But you also need to be healthy. You need to be able to build that human capital. So health becomes very important. So all of these are very interrelated, and of course, as you said, regional cooperation. I believe very strongly, and I know that you do too, that we are all in this together. It's not going to be a win-lose proposition. It's going to be either win-win or lose-lose. So the challenge, I suppose, is how to make it win-win. And you know, as I said, we're going to have to be very honest in these lectures. We're going to have to be very realistic. And I must confess that I'm very disappointed that the South Asian region, in terms of regional cooperation, has lagged far behind that of East Asia. So what can South Asia do to catch up? And on green growth, again, I think, you know, we'll have to see how Asia would have to take on some responsibilities on the global stage. We're going to be the region of growth and importance. It is expected that by 2050, more than half the global GDP will come from Asia. If that is so, then what are the responsibilities? We just can't say we're big and not take big responsibilities, particularly on climate change and green growth. So we're going to have to look at how do we manage our emissions, our carbon footprint, how do we manage growth but green, growth but clean, growth but inclusive, so it's a sustainable growth. So these lectures, what I'm hoping very much, Shekhar, will give us enough time and food for thought. And basically say, sitting in a place like Delhi, which is so exciting because of all the issues, what are the policy prescriptions for a country like India? I mean, India is going to be one of the 3-4 big economies, no matter what. But are we going to be able to keep it sustainable? Will the country be able to reach the potential, which I think it has? How will it relate with China? How will it relate with Japan? How about with US? So all of these are going to be part of this discussion over the next few months.
I'm not going to ask you too many questions because I know that we have an exciting set of 5 lectures to listen to, And obviously, I'm going to invite all who are interested in these issues to come to these lectures. We will have announcements of the dates for these lectures at the first lecture, which is on the 31st of March at the Alliance Française at 6 p.m. What I did want to say is that after these 5 lectures, I'm hoping very much that I at least will have a clearer view of a question that certainly animates my mind as to when we look at the Asian century and we roll time out maybe a decade or so, thinking about India in the Asian century, is it going to be the case that India will have closed the gap with its East Asian, or at least narrowed the gap with our East Asian neighbors? Or is it going to be the case that India will not have done that and the gap between East Asia and India will have widened? I'm not going to ask you for an answer because I suspect you will get the answers from listening to your lectures. But certainly I am very curious to think about what will happen when you think about 2025. Will that gap have widened, or indeed will it have narrowed? And I think it's not just important for India, but I suspect it's going to be important for all of Asia as well, given the size of the Indian economy. So let's look forward to a wonderful set of lectures. Thank you again for coming in.
Thank
look
you.
forward very much to these lectures.
So do I.
Thank you,
Thank
Rajat.
you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.